Hi, I'm Tim. I am the Tinkering Turtle. Today is the second installment of the Himiway Zebra video series. Today we're going to talk about getting your bike properly adjusted before you put it out on the road. There's a few things we're going to talk about today. First, how to properly plug in the battery both on the bike when it's installed in the frame and on the bench. The proper sequence to plug stuff in to make sure you don't short out the battery. Next, we're going to work on tire pressure, get the bike sitting right with the proper pressures. I'm going to go over my preferred, plus I'm going to tell you what the conventional wisdom is for those. Then we're going to adjust the seat height, and we're going to adjust the handlebars and all the components on the handlebars so they're easily grabbed and manipulated while you're riding. After that, we're going to adjust the indexing on the derailleur if at all required. After that, we're going to show you how to properly align the brake calipers to the rotors and adjust the handles if required to get the proper amount of throw to the grip. And last, I will talk about how to bed the brakes. Unfortunately, I can't take you outside and bed it right now because there is snow and ice on the paths, and if I try to get up to speed, I'm going to hit ice and then I'll go down, and it's not going to happen. So I will talk about bedding the brakes. It's a very important step. Please don't skip that one. It definitely affects the performance of the brakes and can eliminate a lot of the squeals and squeaks you may get with a new bike. Let's get into it. Okay, the first thing we want to talk about is charging the battery while it's in the bike. As you can see, the battery's here in the frame. The charging port's here and the key's here. The key is only for removing the battery from the bike. It is not for turning the bike on and off. The power will always be able to come on if you've got the battery in place. The key only releases the battery. So the proper way to do this is you take this end of the charger, you open up the port, you slide this into the battery till it's fully seated, and then you plug in the socket to a wall outlet, or in this case an extension cord. What you're going to see is the light will turn green and then red. Green means it's fully charged, red means it's charging. So right now the battery wasn't completely full, so the red says I'm charging the battery right now. When this turns green again, then the battery is completely full. Now there is a warning on the side that says that this will get hot while you're charging, and it is true. You don't want to set it on a carpet, for example, like you don't want to set it on, like I've got a cargo blanket here. You want it on a hard surface that is not flammable, so that if this does get so hot that it melts or catches something on fire, you don't do any damage. This can get very warm. Don't get too freaked out about that. It's perfectly normal. As soon as it's done charging, it'll cool back off. You want to leave this in a position where there's airflow around it. You don't want to set stuff on it. That way it can cool down as it goes. And again, I wouldn't set it on a piece of fabric like I am here. I would set it on a hard surface. Let's show you how to do this on the bench. Now I showed you how to remove the battery off the bike last time, but I'll show it again. You put the key up here in the key slot, and you'll turn it all the way forward, holding the battery up in place. You'll turn the lever underneath the frame, and you'll slide the battery out. Remove the key. Okay, if you have the battery on the bench, and this is the 20 amp hour battery, you can see if there's a charge by pushing in the button. There'll be a light. Normally on most batteries there's a series of lights to tell you how full it is. I'm not exactly sure what this one's telling you, but there is that tells you it's at least full enough. Now we know it's not completely full because I just tried to charge it on the bike and the battery charger turned red. On the other end of the battery, you'll find the charge port. Just like when we did it on the bike, we will put this side all the way into the charge port before plugging it into an outlet. You'll see the light turns green and then red, which indicates this is charging. You'll hear a fan come on to start cooling the charger, and you'll want to set the charger on a hard surface that isn't flammable with nothing on top of it until the battery is fully charged. When the battery is fully charged, the light will turn green. So I'm going to let this sit and fully charge the battery while I'm doing the rest of the adjustments on the bike. The next step we're going to do is let's talk about tire pressure. So the next step is to properly pressurize our tires. The tires, when they come from the manufacturers, you never know exactly where they're going to be because they could have been in a box for a little while and they could lose pressure just from that. My preferred pressure for when I'm riding is 25 psi. These fat tires are typically rated up to 30 psi max. The reason I use 25 is because I almost always ride on paved bike paths and I want the least amount of rolling resistance possible, but I don't want to take it to the max 30 because I've seen people hit bumps and pop the bead off the wheel and lose pressure. So I tend to stay about 5 pounds under the max, just to give me a little bit of leeway room, so if I hit a curb or a railroad tie or something like that, it doesn't put undue pressure or amount of pressure on the beads. The conventional wisdom for tire pressures is 20 psi for pavement, 15 psi for dirt and gravel, and then 7 to 10 psi for sand, just for your reference. To do this, obviously everybody's filled up a tire, whether you're using a bicycle pump or in my case a compressor. Just take the cap off. These are Schrader tubes. And then as I can see here, this has got maybe 3 psi. So I'm going to fill that up to 25. And the back wheel is at 25 psi. Let's do the front. Now it's the same process on the front, so I won't talk a lot about it. .25 psi and put the cap back on. Okay, the next step is adjusting the seat height and orientation for your ride. Most of the stuff that I've seen online says that your seat should be basically flat. So if you put some sort of level on it and look at it, you can kind of see where flat is. So from what I've seen, I've got the tire pressure, the bike is sitting straight up. The seat is just a touch nose down. So to adjust that, there's a bolt right under the saddle that hooks into the clamp for the seat. You loosen that. Then you adjust the seat to where you want it. That's a little bit too much. That's just right. And then you retighten this bolt below the seat. Make sure it's good and tight, and then recheck your... Now, it's hard to get it perfect. This is slightly nose high, which I think is fine, and that'll be good to get it basically horizontal. If I decide to take it out on the road and I decide I want that down a little bit more, I can do that. But I think that's a good position for the seat height as it is. The next step is to adjust the height of the seat. Okay, to adjust the height of the seat, you'll put the right hand crank all the way down to the bottom of its stroke, and you'll put your heel on the pedal, not your toe or your foot, which is what you'd ride doing. Once the heel's on, your leg should be straight. As you can see, my leg's bent, so the seat needs to come up. So I'll adjust that now. To adjust the height, you'll open the cam lock, slide it up, and then close the cam lock down again. If your cam lock isn't tight enough, open it up and you can adjust it with the nut on the back side here and keep testing it until it's good and tight, because you don't want this loose. You don't want your seats wiggling side to side while you're riding. So again, put my heel on the pedal. I got to come up slightly more. Now when I'm on the seat, my leg is barely straight. Then when I slide my toe or the ball of my foot back to the pedal, you can see my leg has a bend in it, or a slight bend in it. And that's what you want to see. Now once you're at this point, you can adjust the seat height up and down for comfort. But what you're looking for is a full stroke on the pedal with your knee slightly bent at full extension. And this is a good place to start when you first take your bike out. So the next thing we want to do is we want to feel the handlebars and make sure that those are in a good position. You want to feel where your brakes are. Usually I like them slightly down, so when you grab, you're grabbing down and pulling up. These are a little high for me, so I'm going to make that adjustment. The controller to me looks like it's bent way up, so I'll loosen that and we'll slide that down. But this process is 100% about getting these things where you can reach them for the bell, for the gear shift, and just make sure everything's aligned the way you want it. Again, I'm going to start with the brake handles. They seem to be a little high. I want them down at a steeper angle. And then I'll adjust the keypad, and then I think this feels pretty good. Exactly where everything's at. But I'll make those two adjustments real quick and then we'll go on from there. So to adjust the brake handles, it's a similar clamping system that we had on the stem. We'll loosen up the bolts, until it's loose. And what I see here is that the throttle casing coming out here, and the gear shift has kind of got that locked in place, so I'm going to have to loosen up the throttle casing and slide it down so I can put more angle on the brake handle here. To loosen up the throttle casing, there's a bolt right under here we'll loosen. That way we'll be able to rotate it around the handlebar. So I loosen that, and you can see now that this casing here can rotate down. I just rotate down a little bit and then we'll tighten it back up. Doesn't have to be a whole lot. Tighten it back up, it's nice. Now I can rotate the handle down to get that angle that I was looking for. Now once I get this brake handle pushed down to where I like the angle of it, then I just simply tighten up the two bolts on the back and lock that in place. And I'll repeat the process on the other side. That's good and tight now. Let's do the other side. So now that I've got this loosened, I want to pull it down, and I'm going to put my hands not just on this side but the other side so I can match up the angles on both this brake handle and the one on the right hand side. Once I feel they're properly lined up, I will tighten this one back up. And once I have both the brake handles adjusted, I can see that they're both at the same angle and they pull in really nicely. Now one thing I'm noticing is when I pull this one in, I've got about an inch gap, but I pull this one in, I've got maybe 3/4 to a half. There is a way to adjust that. Let me show you. So what you'll see in here is a little set screw right in behind the handle. And what you do to adjust this throw, see how far it comes in there, is you'll actually tighten that in, I think, to increase the gap. So let's give that a try. This is a 2mm Allen wrench. And I'm just gonna tighten it up a little bit and then recheck it, and you can see I'm already getting a bigger gap there. So now the gap on the left hand side over here and the right hand side over here are the same when you squeeze that in. You don't want this handle coming all the way back to the grip. If it's too big of a gap, then you just back this set screw out and it'll help you get closer. But what I'm looking for here is about an inch to 3/4 of an inch when it's fully engaged. Now, as I mentioned, this keypad seems to be way up here. I want to pull it back a little bit so it presents to the rider better. So there's a little 2.5mm Allen wrench. You just loosen that up. You can slide that back so it better presents to the rider, and then tighten that back up. Now the other thing I noticed is that the bell was a little far away from the grip, so I'm going to take and loosen that up, and that's just a Phillips head screwdriver, and I'm going to slide that closer to the gear shift and retighten that back down. So that's how to use the bell too, is you pull down on the hammer and it smacks back into the bell. I like the way the gear shift's at right now, so I'm going to leave that where it's at, and I think we're all set for adjusting the handlebars. So I like where the gear shift's at, so I don't need to adjust that. I've adjusted the brakes, the controller, the display. Everything's where I want it to be. So I think I'm all good. Let's move on to the next step. So as you can see by looking at the gear shift, we're in second gear up here on the handlebars. And in addition to that, we're in second gear on the cassette. The largest gear is the first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, sixth gear, seventh gear. So you have 7 gears, the largest being up here. So to adjust the indexer, what the indexer does is it aligns this bottom derailleur with the gear. So that is the knob at the end of the cable. This cable comes down and there's a black knob with some adjustments. As you turn that, it'll adjust this in and out slightly to coincide exactly with the gear. So to do this, to check it, what we need to do is we're going to lean the bike up so the tire on the kickstand so the tire comes up off the ground, and I'm going to just, and you can hear it's very quiet, there's no extra clanking, and it's really nice. So now I went up above and I changed it to first gear. So to check that, I'm going to again lean it up, and you can see now it's in first gear. There's no excessive noise when you pedal. So that tells me that the indexing is really good. If it was bad, there was an excessive amount of clanking or the chain wasn't in the proper gear, you'll turn this knob, see if I can get a better picture of that, you'll turn this knob here or counterclockwise to move this lower derailleur in towards the wheel, and counterclockwise to move, or clockwise to move it out. That will give you fine-tuned adjustment for the chain as it goes down through each gear. Now what I'm going to do before I say this is good is I'm going to go up above and I'm going to change the gears, and I'm going to cycle it through each gear to make sure that I don't have any issues with the chain getting close to the wheel or the fender or anything as it goes all the way down and all the way back up through its cycle. So I changed it to second gear. I'm going to lean it up. Goes into the next gear, no problem. Third gear. Fourth gear. Fifth gear. And again, you'll listen and there's no excessive clanking, so that chain is perfectly aligned on the cassette. Sixth gear. And seventh gear. Now I'm double checking the chain at each position to make sure we're not rubbing on the frame or anything, and it all looks really good. So I'm going to say that the indexing on this bike didn't need to be adjusted, but again, if you need to adjust it, just turn this counterclockwise to move the chain in, or clockwise to turn it out. So counterclockwise turns it in, clockwise turns it out. And that's as you're looking from the rear of the bike. It's a really simple process, and it will get you 90% of the way there. So I'm going to consider that done. Let's move on to the brakes. Okay, to check the brakes, to make sure they're aligned, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift the bike up and spin the wheel and listen for any rubbing. Now the front one doesn't have any rubbing, so I'm going to say that that's perfectly centered. So let's move on to the back one. So the Himiway Zebra has hydraulic brakes, and the brake calipers are mounted inside the frame here. This mounting bolt is easy to get to. This one up here, not so much. You have to come in over the top of the frame to get to this back bolt, which makes it a little bit interesting to loosen and tighten. So to check the back here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean the bike up on the kickstand, and I'm going to spin the wheel and listen for any rubbing. And as you can hear, there's a rubbing sound. So that tells me that the back brake caliper is not properly aligned to the rotor. So now the process for aligning these, because they're hydraulic, it's very simple. There are no adjustments on the caliper itself. You simply loosen the 2 mounting bolts. You'll hold the brake lever tight. You'll engage the brake and hold it tight, and then you'll retighten these 2 bolts back down. So let's do that. These don't have to be loosened too much, just enough to get the caliper free play. Once you get them loosened, you're just looking for it to wiggle around. That's all the looser that needs to be. Now we'll go up above and we'll put a clamp on the brake handle. So if you have somebody here that can squeeze the handle for you, then you just have them come up here and they hold it while you tighten the mounting bolts back up. I don't have anybody with me here today, so I'm going to use a clamp. And you don't squeeze it so tight that it bottoms out, but you just want to fully engage the brake. If you don't have a clamp, you can use a shoelace or some sort of rope to tie this back and hold it in place while you're tightening the mounting bolts. Now that we've put the clamp on the handle, the brake is fully engaged on the rotor. We just tighten these two bolts back down. And I want to tighten both of them down just a little bit at a time and alternate so that I don't take the chance of pulling this off one way or the other. This back one's a little bit hard to get to, but just keep at it until you get it tight, because you want both of these tight so they don't change alignment when you're applying the brakes. Okay, now that I've tightened both those down, I'm going to go ahead and take the clamp off up above. Okay, I've removed the clamp from up above on the brake handle, so the brakes are now free. I'm going to lead this over. Now if you do continue to get noise, you can loosen these back up and make slight adjustments until that rotor is again centered. There you go. So now that I've got it in place, I'm going to slowly tighten these up, half a turn at a time, to lock it in place. So once I've finished fiddling with this and getting the minor adjustments done, I just lean this over and I double check it. And as you can hear, no more noise. Now if you do end up with a slight rub and you can't seem to get it worked out, then wait until you take it out and bed the brakes and get those brakes wore in a little bit, because that'll help increase the distance for the brake pads to the rotor, and that may eliminate the rubbing as well. But I've got this adjusted so there's no noise. The front's adjusted so there's no noise, so I'm thinking we're done for now. One last thing I wanted to mention before I let you guys go is this container of bolts and nuts and washers turns out to be extra parts, which is super nice. Kudos for Himiway for helping us out, not having to go to the store to look for these bolts. That is just simply awesome. So it was a little disappointing that that back mounting point for the brake caliper was down behind the frame, but as you saw, you can get a Allen wrench down in there, either going the long ways from above or the short ways by going inside the frame to the spokes. So it is workable. It's not as bad as some bikes I've seen, so we've got that going for us. But that's basically the adjustments you need to do before you take it out to ride. Now, as I spoke about before, the first thing you're going to want to do when you take it out for the ride is bed in the brakes. So what does that mean? That means you'll fire up the bike, you'll get going down a path or whatever, have a nice long runway to get it up to 15, 16 miles an hour, you know, a good clip. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pull both brakes at once. And your bike's going to slow down, but don't bring the bikes to a complete stop. Okay, because what you're doing here is you're heating up the brake pads and you're wearing the surfaces into the rotor. And if you hold those hot brake pads, especially brand new brake pads, all the way to the stop, it can leave residue on that part of the brake pad and can cause a sound or a squeak as you go. So you'll go up to 15, 16, 18 miles an hour. You'll pull in both brakes, come almost to a stop, and then you'll feather the brakes back out. And then you'll pick up speed again. And you'll do that 10 or 15 times. And what that's doing the whole time is the brakes come in, is they're wearing, so they're parallel to the rotor, and they've got a nice surface on them because you're heating them up to get that nice surface. After 10 or 15 times, you should be set to go. These brakes, from what I've heard, are aligned properly now, and they don't have any squeaks that I can tell. I won't know that for sure until I get it out and bed the brakes. But that'll be in the next video where I do the ride and review, and I'll go over all the specs and features of the Himiway Zebra. and we'll talk about my thoughts on how it rides. Again, it may be a month or so before I can do that, or 2, because there is still snow on the ground, and even though this week's gotten a little warmer, now it's exposed to all the ice on the bike paths. So I won't be able to get to that video right away. But that's the basic process for doing the setup and adjustments prior to taking your brand new Himiway Zebra out on the road. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.